governor has stated he'd like it to move forward. I think it moved forward in a very small scale, and the counties or the areas that wanted to move forward in, they can help those counties and areas economically. And I think that that's something that the governor and the commissioner, that's what they're focusing on, because early on they had, as I said, a very moderate start, and then they talked about a full-blown start. I don't think it's going to be at that phase at all. I think that I think the state has been very cautious. I think Commissioner Martens has a grasp of the issues, and I think that his team and all the people working on the final SGIS report are working diligently to make sure that if this process moves forward, that it be done safely and it be done effectively. I also believe too that there are some benefits, and I can tell you a couple of benefits right now. Is that you have two coal-fired plants that are sitting here, one in Huntley and one in Dunkirk. The one in Dunkirk, they just recently went ahead and kind of mothballed this project. It's costing 60 jobs now in Dunkirk in this area. These two facility plants would like to convert over to natural gas. If they convert over to natural gas, they're going to be able to create more electricity. They're going to hire additional people. And with the other project that we have started right now with the transmission line upgrade, because of the bottleneck in central New York and other areas of New York, and with the Indian power plant set to have problems in a couple of years from renewing its licensing that provide 25% of electricity down in New York City, without that Indian Point power plant, downstate New York is going to need electricity. And we have the ability in Western New York to provide that electricity, and we have a way to do it through these particular plants. Somerset already closed down. And if they're able to convert over to natural gas and we're able to increase that electrical output and we're able to do these transmission lines, which should be done, we could have a serious economic benefit in Western New York and with job creation in that area. And it's important because right now, Quebec is running a line from Canada down through the waterways, through other states, to jump in first to provide that electricity. Now, that's not good. That's not good for Western New York. And it's not good for New York State as a whole, because eventually when Quebec starts seeing an influx and they start expanding themselves, little by little they're going to be charging, they may charge lower electrical rates right now, but in the future they're going to increase those rates because they're going to need the electricity to go back in their own province in order to take care of the people that are moving back when they're expanding in their own province as well. So I think the governor's on the right track on these transmission lines. I think a lot of it's tied in together, and I think it's something that people need to look at, that it's not just about, to me, about jobs in regions where this process could take place. It's also about the potential for jobs by using the natural gas to not only upgrade and remove two coal-fired plants, but to get them online and get them into a market that makes them top of the line. And selling our electricity, I think, would be very important in that regard. So I am, like a lot of people, waiting for the SGIS report to be completed. I, like a lot of people, we have concerns because we don't want to have any contamination to our waterways or to people that have wells in regions. And it's a process that's going to have to be, if it moves forward, regulated, and it's something that's going to have to be looked at. And it has been looked at, and it's something that's continuing to be looked at as this process moves forward. So that's my position where we stand. I believe in the New York State Senate and my NCON committee. I don't know if anybody, do we do questions?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if anybody just wanted to get to the bar. I don't know.
Well, we started a half hour. I don't
Okay.
know if we could start the bar earlier than that. But.
Yeah. It seems like, I don't know if we can start the bar early. Yes, go ahead.
Has the funding that is needed for the regulatory system been considered to come partly, at least, from industry? Let them help pay the bill to regulate themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the controller talked about setting up a separate fund in case there was an accident or something along those lines. And I think the bonding requirements actually take care of that, so I don't think you need to do anything separately. But it has been talked about that the fees that would be earmarked specifically go to the DEC and the other areas of government that would do the regulation of this process. I mean, there's no other funding source where it can possibly come from. I mean, it's just not there. We're in a very tenuous financial circumstances in New York State. We've been dealing with $10 and $15 billion budget deficits that we got rid of the last couple of years, but you're still, you're seeing some improvement in the financial constraints, but not to the point of being able to take from one area to another area. That's the way it would have to go. Yes.
So I'm one of those guys in the middle. I'm an industry guy, but I absolutely believe that the government should have proper and smart regulation, and this be done, development be done properly. Now, I believe that fundamentally health concerns would be the motivation for almost all of these regulatory issues.
Right.
We want to protect our citizens. So I have to tell you that it looks like simple obstructionism to in September 2012, when this process has been going on for 2, 3 or more years, that in September 2012 we announced the need to have a health review. What have they been doing the last 2, 3 years? It doesn't smell right.
Well, I can tell you that for the last 2 years, they were looking at the regulations that are in other states. And I think New York State, I feel like this, New York State's a very highly regulated state. There are issues in the ENCON that I come up with dealing with wetlands and brownfields, where I'm actually trying to remove some of those regulations because it stops development and it stops production. But I think in this instance, they were looking at what the regulations are in other states and seeing if this process can move forward. When we've talked about it last session about the health impact statement being done, or the health impact study being done. I don't know why they waited to September to have it done. I mean, I think it's something that naturally, in some of the hearings that I went to, where they talked about you have to have a health impact study as to if this process would move forward. I don't know why they waited to September of 2012, but I guess the good point is that they're actually going to do one where before they weren't even going to do one at all. So I think that that's something that that they realized. And I've said to the commissioner, I says, if you're going to do a health impact study, you got to do a health impact study. But I was surprised when I got a phone call saying this is how we're going to do it. I was under the impression they weren't going to do one at all, so I'm happy they are going to do one. And I guess also in that point is that, as I said, we'll have to see next year. Plus, we'll also have to see if I'm actually going to be there next year because I have an election coming up. But next year, we'll have to see, as this young lady in the back has stated, what is the funding source going to be, if this process moves forward. There's no funding for it at this point, so. Who did I cut off? Okay, sorry.
Quick question for you. I think you said that we didn't really know what was in the frac additives when you add it. Do you know that before you get a permit, you have to review that with the DEC?
Well, I do understand that, and I also understand that some of the companies talk about proprietary rights, which is like the secret sauce in a Big Mac sandwich, and saying that we don't want to go ahead and disclose what these products are. I've met with numerous groups that say that they have cleaner fluid that doesn't have so many additives or so many chemicals. When I've met with these groups in Albany, and then I ask them, well, what's in it? And they say, well, I can't tell you.
Well, they can't tell you, but they tell the DEC exactly.
Well,
They have to have the
Well,
chemical.
right, I know,
whole deal is-
I understand what you're saying.
No, what you were saying is that it wasn't reviewed and that no one knows what's in it. And yes, they do know what's in it. And what I'm telling you is that when we did a low-volume frac in Otsego County, we did send it up to a water waste facility. And we tested the water after we fracked it. They knew exactly what was in it and what the frac additives were and were able to handle it. By you saying that it can't happen, I just think you just haven't seen enough factual information.
Well, I have seen the factual information that the hydrocarbons and the other chemicals that are in the water actually destroy the microorganisms in the plant itself, which is what its intended treatment is supposed to be.
Right.
And that was actually verified to me by the Niagara Falls Water Board themselves, and stating that, we're not at this phase yet. And I know for a fact that dumping that in the lower gorge then had Canada involved, and we don't want this being dumped then into Lake Ontario as well either. So What I'm saying is, these are reports that I had at hearings that I attended and hearings that I had. And the one hearing that I had specifically focused on the flowback water itself. And there were facilities that wrote in and said, just on testimony really on paper, that we don't think that we're at the stage to handle this type of flowback water at this point. So the legislation that I have says, if you can prove that this can be done, then show us you can do it.
Well, exactly, because the DEC made us do extensive test results from the discharge of this wastewater treatment plant for 35 days. So we can prove it.
Okay, you guys should have showed up at the hearing.
Well, I will show you the data.
I appreciate that very much.
Senator, let's say, very optimistically, 6 months or a year from now, which is already well postponed, the SKICE is ready. What's the process and how long does it take after that for that to become law and the permit ability to be established?
Well, I think that if the process, let's say they go through the health impact study and it's done and the SJS report is done, and because there isn't a moratorium in place right now, it's a regulatory moratorium by the DEC itself, because they're not ready to issue permits, because they're not done with their study, they're not done with the health impact study. When they're done with those studies and they feel that they want to move forward, it's not going to take legislation to have them move forward. What it's going to do is it's going to take legislation to figure out what the funding stream is going to be in order to have the process move forward.
Just as Paula, is there legislation then susceptible to litigation? Whenever they say this is what we think this is reasonable regulation to move forward, is that going to be, in your estimate, going to be a barrier put up because of litigation by towns and boroughs?
Well, there has been litigation already, and they've cited saying that they would allow the towns and villages actually decide whether or not they want that process there or allow permits. I guess that litigation is still going to be going on because does the state preempt the town or the village, and what the courts are saying is no, you guys can go ahead and do it when it results in this type of process. So I know that those court battles are still going on itself right now. I think that once the DEC is done with all of their process, they're going to probably have a report out on how the funding mechanism would take place. And I think the funding mechanism goes back to what the young lady says in the back, and that is from the industry itself, and earmarking it, and also putting in a lockbox and a provision in legislation that it cannot be swept into other funding streams, because the DEC has been governed for a while. Yes, sir.
Senator Grisanti, I firmly believe that geologists have a critical role to play in protecting the health and welfare of the citizens of New York. What is your position on the licensing of professional geologists in New York?
Well, I think that's important. I mean, I think you're talking about an area that's something that the geologist itself, I'm no expert, on what's underground, or I'm no scientist. I just look at reports and data that's actually coming from both sides of an issue, but I have the utmost respect, and I don't have a problem with that.
Do you support licensure?
I do. If that's something that, I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had read and heard some time ago now when DEC was putting together a committee to evaluate coming the staff and that meeting in anticipation. And the number was something like 240, something like that. And I just wanted just to mention to you that you're looking at a sea of experienced people bringing for decades of oversight experience.
Right.
And that it doesn't all have to come from DEC.
Okay. Thank you.
Is the health impact study going to affect the release of the SJS? In other words,
Yeah.
so if the SJS is not going to be released now until the health impact study?
That's my understanding. That's my understanding is that, and which is why I don't know why they waited till September. I mean, it should have been going at the same time. It kind of was off, and then it kind of just went out by itself.
Probably no idea how long that process is going to be.
No, I don't have any timeline on that. I mean, like I said, I was kind of shocked that because I thought, that they just weren't going to do one at all, and then when it came up, they were going to do one, I was like, okay, well, we're going to do one, but now, my understanding is that in order to have a complete SGIS, they want to have that completed first, which should have been something that was done before. Yes.
What are you going to monitor for in the health, in the impact study?
And I don't have
And where are you
specifics, but
gonna
I'm,
monitor?
I don't have specifics, but I'm thinking probably air, I'm thinking, well, taking a look at the process, you're probably talking about air, water, samples, things along those lines.
Do you know where
Which to me, I mean, if the process isn't going on here in New York, how are you gonna do a health impact study on a process that's not happening here? So I mean, and I said that before.
Baseline study, first of all, depending upon where, and where, you know, where they're even going to look at it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have the exact report. This is something I just found out about yesterday.
Mr. Senator, you've shown that you're willing to take the right vote for New York State, even if it's unpopular. We have a lot of people who oppose fracking in this state. If this was shown to be safe and the right thing for New York, would you vote against the groups that believe it's not?
Well, like I said, I mean, until the final reports come out, is basically going to gauge my decision. I'm not going to talk about what's going to happen in the future with a lot of what ifs until I look. I mean, I have great staff myself. I have people that I talk to as well. And it's not just my decision alone. It's basically something that either comes out of my committee or something that comes out of our conference. But it's something that, you know, basically for me is if the process, you got to make sure that this process is safe. You know, I've heard the stories of problems that happen. But I also know in the areas where those problems happen, the regulation wasn't as it is going to be in New York State. And I understand on the method itself, that our method of drilling, capping, wells, et cetera, would be far superior to what has actually happened in other areas that have problems with the casing designs and everything else. So, you know, until we have a full report, and you know, that's a great question because it's like I said, I mean, and I said this probably 6 months ago. How do you do a health impact study in the state of New York? You do a baseline study, but how do you do a health impact study on something that process that's not going on here? I mean, there's different geological issues from region to region. So I don't know how. I mean, you guys are the geologists. How do you do a health impact study from Pennsylvania when you have different geological formation that's in New York and come up with a true factor of that test? So I think if it's a process that's going to move forward and they do baseline, you got to continue. You got to continue. If the process moves forward, to continue to do health impact studies while it's going on in particular areas, because I think you're going to get different results in each area. Anybody else?
Can I ask one more? The idea of growing jobs through the use of natural gas is certainly very appealing. But has the state taken into consideration that by giving individual towns home rule and the right to stop the process, and if that process means that they can interfere with the transportation of the natural gas from the areas that are producing it, then companies aren't going to want to.
That's a good point, because if there are regulations and you need to go from one town to another and this town wants it, then they're going to have a hard time with, I know exactly what you're saying, with the trucks or materials or whatever, and going through. And I think that that's something that is part of the argument that is in the courts right now, is that, you know, it's almost like, you know, being landlocked where you won't have any ingress or egress over properties that don't want to process, where next door they may want the process and now they have problems from doing it. So I know that that's something that's being looked at as well, and I know that's something that the courts are going to have to take into consideration in their decisions.
The regulatory moratorium, as I understand, is based on people wanting to rely on the generic EIS. There's been an issue about whether or not industry could move forward on EIS for an application for a well. Have you heard any discussion about
Yeah,
that?
I just think that that the DEC is taking a firm stance that until the SGIS report is done, that they're not going to be issuing any permits. And I know that a big concern is where's the money coming from, and that, you know, that individuals need to be reinstated, so to speak, on the jobs for the DEC. I wouldn't have a problem at all if they actually had a separate geologist wing for the DEC, and they hired a bunch of you guys in this room to go ahead and take care of it.
Is it true that the moratorium is actually on horizontal well fracturing, you can actually drill a vertical, you can
Right.
actually drill a horizontal,
Sure.
and you can frack a vertical, but the thing you can't do is frack a horizontal. Is that true?
80,000 gallons.
Yeah, it goes by water, but also, yeah, there's vertical wells right now. Vertical wells have been here for decades, so that's.
And being permitted to frack
Right.
as we speak.
Yeah. Yeah, smart, right.
If you were an oil and gas operator instead of a state senator, and you had some properties here in New York, you think you'd be staying?
Would I be staying?
Yeah, you know, you got properties here in New York to drill and potentially make some money on, and you're an oil and gas operator. And
Well,
stuff.
I'll tell you, I've had people that came up to me and came to Albany that, and these are one of the things that I've talked about where, let's say the soil or their farming, they need to get into a different area. They want to expand their farm, they want to expand a different revenue source for their family because maybe the land or so on and so forth has been exhausted from the years and years and decades of farming, and they need money from those leaseholds in order to do that, to be able to expand their farm, or else they're going to shut down. And they're not pretty stories. You know what I mean? They're not pretty stories. And and they're in the areas where they want this process to move forward. You know, in the area of Binghamton and areas around those lines. And as I said, we're in an area where it's not going to be happening. They're in an area where some of the areas want it to happen. And, if the regulations are there and it can happen, I think it's going to save those particular farms. So,
Looking at this small crowd of knowledgeable people and then having gone to a lot of the sessions that TPC has hosted for several years, I just see a disparity between understanding and fact, and it bothers me. So is there anything you can do at your level to try to balance that out?
well, disparity of facts in what way? From people that don't want the process to people that do want the process?
Well, yeah, and other people on the fence, there just seems to be a huge quantity of people who are not really
Yeah.
that knowledgeable about this.
Well, it's interesting because it seems to me that the people that don't want it to happen, and let's say in our Senate conference, and I'm not going to say names, that don't want it to happen, are in areas where the process isn't going to happen. You know what I mean? And the people that want it to happen are the senators of areas where the land value that we just talked about, they need it for economic viability in the region. And, that's been talked about in conference, to be quite honest with you, where, somebody will get up and say something, and then somebody will say, well, it's not gonna happen in your area, so what do you got a problem with it for? You know what I mean? So those are specifics, but I think that, there's been such negativity about, some of the things that happened in Pennsylvania, that it's carried into New York State. And, the message has been that this process is not safe, that this process cannot move forward.
But some of those have been reversed.
Yes.
since.
Yeah, but I'm saying though that that's what has happened, but you still have a large group and you still have people that don't believe that this process, can be done safely. I think that if you have the proper regulations in place, that if you have the proper funding stream in place, and that if you have areas that want this process to move forward, you should allow those areas to move forward.
You stated that the Buffalo and Niagara Falls water treatment systems are not able at this point in time to treat the waste. But are we the closest treatment systems to where the fracking is going to actually occur? And if we're not, have those treatment places been looked at and asked the same questions?
Well, he had mentioned that they tried it in an area, and they said that they have the ability to do it. I have not seen that data. I mean, the people that I've talked to, the concern is the only two industrial treatment facility plants is not Buffalo, but it's Niagara Falls and the city of Tonawanda. So the concern is if this process moves forward, that you're trucking this flow back to Niagara Falls. And that's where people.
Are those the only two in the state?
Pardon me?
Are those the only two industrial water treatment facilities in the state?
In the state.
Okay, those are the only two. In the
And the concern is that if you're trucking,
Municipal ones with physical chemical treatment.
Right, and if the concern was if you're trucking and there's spills, you know, or along the way, people can dump, people can do those things, which is why the other pieces of legislation that I have talk about tracking, so to prevent dumping, and also talk about a 2-hour rule on a spill. And I'm not talking about just water, you know, normal H2O leaking from a truck. It's got to be the